never thought a silver cross and a $500 fine could ignite a national reckoning, but that's exactly what happened. What started as a quiet courtroom visit became a flashpoint in the battle over faith, power, and the Constitution. One young woman walked in to observe and ended up on trial herself, not for breaking the law, but for wearing her belief where everyone could see it. If you've ever wondered what happens when conviction confronts control, keep reading, because once this gavel falls, there's no turning back. The sun had barely risen over Washington, D.C., but the east wing of the White House was already humming. Inside a glass-paneled office near the Situation Room, Karoline Leavitt sat perfectly still, eyes scanning a freshly arrived email on her secure tablet. Observe proceedings at Capitol Square Court. Potential religious discrimination in public space, ruling. Full discretion required. President Dalton Creed. Karoline didn't need further context. She'd worked with President Creed long enough to know when something wasn't just political, it was personal. With one hand, she closed the tablet. With the other, she gently adjusted the small silver cross that hung at her collar, a token from her mother, worn since childhood, and never once removed in public service. She didn't change her clothes. Her navy mule blazer, white blouse, and slacks were crisp and clean, ready. All she did was reach for her notebook, her government ID, and her phone set to silent and recording. 20 minutes later, she walked alone into Capitol Square Court, a concrete block of bureaucracy just steps from the Capitol dome. Inside, the fluorescent lighting buzzed with a sterile hum. The air was cold, the bench seating unpadded and unforgiving. The courtroom smelled faintly of old paper and something harsher: fear. Karoline took a seat in the middle row, surrounded by locals waiting for minor cases, parking disputes, small claims, civil noise violations. She noticed eyes drifting toward her, not because they recognized her, but because of the glimmer at her collar. The silver cross under these lights seemed almost defiant. She remained composed, phone in one hand, pen in the other. She was here to observe, not interfere. But she also knew that in places like this, observation was never truly passive. Then the door behind the bench opened, and silence swallowed the room. Judge Vernon Clay stepped out, robed and rigid. His every movement was clipped, mechanical. Gray hair combed flat against his skull. Thin-rimmed glasses perched on a face that had long since forgotten how to smile. His eyes swept the room, searching not for justice, but for control. He began calling cases quickly, his voice dry as gravel. A parking ticket dismissed, a landlord dispute settled with a warning, a teenager fined for skateboarding on federal steps. Then, he paused. His gaze landed on Karoline. Locked. Narrowed. A beat of silence stretched too long. "You," he said, voice razor-sharp. "In the center row. That cross." Heads turned. Whispers tickled the corners of the room. Clay continued, louder. "This is a courtroom, a place of law, not a place for religious display. Remove it." Karoline didn't flinch. She stood slowly, facing the bench without aggression. "Your Honor," she began, her voice firm but not raised. "This cross is a personal item. It's protected under the First Amendment. I'm here as an observer on behalf of the executive office. I'm not violating any posted rules." Judge Clay's nostrils flared. "Don't lecture me on the Constitution, young lady. This is my courtroom. I say what's allowed." Karoline kept her expression neutral, but her heart was tightening. Every camera, every phone was off. This moment would vanish unless she made it matter. "I respectfully decline to remove it," she said, "and I'd be happy to discuss this further, civilly." Clay slammed his gavel down with a crack that startled even the stenographer. "Contempt of court, $500 fine, payable before you leave this building." A gasp rolled through the room like thunder on tile. Even the bailiff, Marshall Banks, shifted uneasily by the wall. Karoline remained standing, calm, still. The cross at her neck shimmered like a sword in a courtroom full of shields. "I understand your ruling," she said, measured, "but I will not remove my faith, even here. Especially here." Her words echoed, soft but defiant. The judge's eyes twitched, His gavel hand trembled just slightly. But he said nothing more. Karoline sat back down. She did not look left or right. She didn't need to. The tension in the room had shifted. Power had been challenged, not by force, but by presence. Judge Clay resumed his docket, but the air remained thin, charged. Karoline took her pen, scrawled one sentence in her notebook. This isn't about a cross. It's about who's allowed to wear one. And beneath that, almost as a whisper to herself, he just made a mistake. Karoline stood when summoned. She moved slowly, deliberately, as if each step to the front of the courtroom weighed more than the last. The room didn't breathe. Not the clerk, not the bailiff, not the man in the back row, still gripping his parking ticket. She stopped just short of the defense podium. "Miss Leavitt," Judge Vernon Clay said, voice slick with disdain. "Since you seem eager to make a statement, I'll permit you 2 minutes. But if you say one word outside the bounds of courtroom decorum, you'll double your fine. Are we clear?" "Yes, Your Honor," she replied, gaze steady. She didn't reach for her phone or notes. She didn't clear her throat. She just looked at him and began. "In 1993, she said, the Supreme Court ruled in Church of Lukumi Babalu IV City of Hialeah that the government cannot target religious conduct based solely on its religious nature." Clay's eyes hardened. His gavel hand twitched. "In that case," Karoline continued, voice firm but never raised, "the court protected the right to express religious beliefs, even if the government found them inconvenient or controversial." Clay snapped. "This isn't a law lecture. You're not an attorney, Miss Leavitt." "No," she replied calmly, "but I am a citizen. One whose freedom of expression does not dissolve at the door of your courtroom." The silence was fractured only by the light tapping of Doris Whitman's trembling fingers on the stenotype machine. A seasoned clerk with 12 years under Clay's bench, Doris had never typed with hands this shaky. She wasn't afraid of Grace's words. She was afraid of how much truth they carried. "Enough," Clay barked. "This ends now. I've given you more than your fair share of time." But Karoline didn't flinch. Instead, with the ease of someone who had practiced this move before, she tapped the side of her phone, quietly, subtly, activating the secure audio recorder. Then, with a flick of her wrist, masked as a gesture of adjusting her sleeve, she triggered a pre-recorded text. "Live, Capitol Court. Situation escalated. Need eyes." Okay. The message hit Marshall Banks' phone across the room. The senior bailiff read it with the practiced discretion of a man who had seen too many things swept under too many rugs. He stepped slightly closer to the bench, posture relaxed but alert. "Your Honor," Karoline said, eyes now surveying the gallery, "I notice no objections to the gentleman in row 3 wearing a t-shirt that says 'I am the law,' or the woman 2 rows behind me wearing a necklace larger than a doorknob." A few people shifted in their seats. The woman with the oversized chain adjusted it awkwardly. The man in the shirt looked away. "But the only person fined for disrupting the dignity of the court," Karoline said slowly, "is the woman wearing a cross." Clay leaned forward, eyes sharp and glassy. "That is because you're making it a symbol, a provocation." "I didn't bring it here to provoke anyone," she replied, "but it seems it provoked you." The gavel slammed down again. "You're walking a thin line, Miss Leavitt." Karoline stepped back from the podium, not to retreat, but to let her words settle. Her voice, though calm, carried across the courtroom like thunder filtered through velvet. She turned slightly toward the courtroom. "I will report this incident to the executive office," she said, no longer seeking permission. "I will also file a formal request for a review of this courtroom's history of rulings related to religious expression." Clay's face flushed crimson. "You think you can intimidate this bench with your proximity to power?" "I think," Karoline said, "that justice doesn't fear oversight, but bias does." The words hung in the air like smoke. For a split second, Judge Clay said nothing. His authority, so often enforced by fear, by silence, by the banging of wood on wood, had met something that didn't back down. Not bravado, not defiance, just a steady refusal to be dismissed. He cleared his throat. "This court is adjourned pending further review. Miss Leavitt's contempt ruling remains in effect. Bailiff, escort her out." But Marshal Banks didn't move immediately. He met Karoline's eyes, gave her a near-invisible nod, then opened the courtroom door without touching her. Karoline walked out, back straight. Behind her the air was thick with murmurs. "She's from the White House, right?" someone whispered. "Did you see the judge's face? $500 for a cross?" Back in the hallway, Karoline stopped, turned off the recording, and saved the file to her secure cloud. Her phone buzzed, a reply from the West Wing. "He did what?" Karoline smiled faintly, not because she enjoyed confrontation, but because she had always known real change never started with comfort. It started with truth, said out loud, where someone didn't want it heard. And Judge Vernon Clay had just handed her the microphone. The Capitol Square court sat in silence that evening, but across town, another room pulsed with purpose. Inside a windowless conference room beneath the east wing of the White House, Karoline Leavitt leaned over a table littered with manila folders, legal printouts, and half-drunk coffee. Her silver cross rested just below her collarbone, catching the flickering light from a desk lamp. She was still in her courtroom clothes, creased but unbothered. Her mind was racing, but her voice was calm. "We're not fighting a man," she said. "We're pulling the curtain back on a system." Seated beside her, Noah Merrick, the administration's youngest legal strategist, tapped furiously on his laptop. He was fresh out of Harvard Law, quick-thinking but already hardened by years of election lawsuits and bureaucratic backlogs. "I pulled Judge Clay's public record," he said, eyes flicking between tabs. "There's a pattern. A steep one?" "How steep?" Karoline asked. 70% of his courtroom contempt fines in the last 18 months were issued to defendants or observers wearing religious symbols. 90% of those were Christian. Karoline's brow furrowed. "And what about others?" "He lets vulgar t-shirts slide. Flashy necklaces. One guy wore a hoodie with 'Satan is my lawyer, no comment' from the bench." Across the table, Alina Porter, a no-nonsense investigator with the Department of Legal Oversight, nodded grimly. She wore her badge clipped to a plain black blazer and carried 2 file boxes of prior citizen complaints. "These aren't isolated. I've spoken to 5 former court attendees today. 4 were fined. 3 used the word targeted." Karoline leaned back. "We need more than anecdotes." "We're about to get one," said Candace Roy, her communications director, scrolling through trending alerts on her phone. "Check this out. #FaithOnTrial just broke into the top 5 in DC. People are posting their own Clay encounters, photos, fines, even an old video." She turned the screen to show a grainy clip. Judge Clay was berating a young woman in a hijab. His voice, tinny through the phone, rang clear. "This is a courtroom, not a place for pageantry." Karoline closed her eyes for a beat. "We're not just dealing with bias. We're dealing with an institution that's never been challenged." Then the unexpected happened. Candace's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, froze, then slowly lifted it to her ear. "This is Candace." A pause. Then she straightened in her seat. "Can you repeat that?" Her voice dropped low. Yes, absolutely. Please send it over. We'll protect your identity." She hung up. "It's Doris Whitman," she said, her voice edged with disbelief. "Clay's courtroom clerk. She kept a personal journal, 12 years worth of cases. She wrote down every time he commented on someone's faith or fined them disproportionately. She's sending the scans now." Alina's face lit up with something close to awe. "That's gold." Karoline stood, her chair scraping back. She walked over to the whiteboard and wrote one word in bold black marker. "Pattern." "We build the case like a prosecutor," she said. "No emotion, no headlines, just data, behavior, proof." Noah nodded. "He's not just a bad judge, he's a predictable one." Candace flipped her phone horizontally. "Also, this video's going viral. 600,000 views in 2 hours. Our press inbox is exploding. Even Liberty Channel 7 is requesting a statement." "We're not giving them a statement," Karoline said. "We're giving them a strategy." She crossed the room, pulled a fresh legal pad from her drawer, and began writing. "We launch in phases," she said. "First, signal the story's bigger than me, that it's not about a $500 fine, it's about precedent. Second, let the data leak naturally. Let the people tell it. Then, when the Judiciary Council starts to sweat, we move for investigation. Public, transparent, irrefutable." She stopped, eyes fixed on the windowless wall like she could already see the headlines beyond it. "This isn't personal," she said. "It's systemic." A ping echoed from Candace's laptop. The first batch of Doris's scanned notes had arrived. She opened the folder, revealing neat cursive lines detailing hundreds of courtroom entries. Grace's name was already at the bottom of the newest page, next to the words, "Cross, Contempt, Outspoken." Karoline stared at it. A soft smile pulled at the corners of her mouth. "Called it contempt," she whispered. "Let's show them what real contempt looks like." By midnight, Candace had cut together a 1-minute anonymous video. Audio testimonies layered over black and white shots of courtroom benches, faded fines, voices saying I was silenced, I was fined, I was told to remove my faith. The screen faded to black. Then, one line in white text. "Justice begins when silence ends." Karoline watched it twice. No edits, no tweaks. "Post it," she said. She returned to her desk, where the $500 fine receipt sat clipped to a folder. Tomorrow, she would walk back into Capitol Square Court. But she wouldn't be alone.